Okay. All right. So this is Salesforce Security Office Hours, second edition. And as I said, everything here is recorded, and so anything you say will be rebroadcast publicly. So just be careful what you say if you don't want that to be recorded, broadcast. Also, this is an open forum, so everyone does have the permission to speak, and we'll talk about the rules of engagement in a second. So since this is only the second edition, I have actually come up with what is Salesforce Security Office Hours. Paraphrased it last time, but let me just kind of read this out because I think this is really important. The reason why I came up with this. So Salesforce Security Office Hours, it was basically created in response to a troubling reality that data breaches in the Salesforce ecosystem are increasing and not declining. And there's way too many organizations lately that are losing sensitive customer data due to attacks that could have been completely prevented or almost completely prevented in most cases. And so I decided to create these sessions in order to change that, to raise awareness. Each week, the idea is we're going to look at real world, potentially some weird real world breaches, and also share Salesforce specific securities best practices, kind of a mix of things. If there's some nice recent events, we'll show those, and try to bring in a number of different Salesforce security experts to help share their knowledge. And the idea, I want to provide all of you with practical and most importantly, actionable steps that you can take today to strengthen your data security and reduce the risk of breaches in your own Salesforce environments and your customer Salesforce environments. All right, so rules of engagement here is basically just like anywhere else, be respectful to others. It's an open engagement. Everyone has the ability to unmute yourself. If you want to ask a question, just try to raise your hand. Unless we're just asking for questions, then of course, obviously, feel free to speak up. Also, take notes and have any kind of takeaways that you can do to try to have something actionable you can take away today to help your organization or yourself. All right, I'm going to get a little bit about myself, and then we're going to introduce John as well. I don't have a slide for John, unfortunately, but who am I? My name is Matt Myers. I'm the CEO and founder of EzProtect. I'm also a Salesforce certified technical architect. I have around 18 years of or so experience in Salesforce. I'm also the author of this book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, which I will be talking about in a minute as it's relevant to the talk today. So I'll leave that for a little bit later. And I'm one of the founding members, along with John here, of the Low Code Security Alliance. So John, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself as well, since I don't really have a
Okay,
slide for you. Apologies.
thanks. No problem. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm John Crimmings. I work for Slalom. I'm a senior principal in our Salesforce practice. I live and work out of Minneapolis. Like Matt said, we connected through the Low Code Security Alliance. Over the last couple of years, I've become very interested and passionate about the importance of Salesforce security, the difference between what is sort of promised in the shared security model and what is the responsibility of stewards of orgs. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here and talk about this topic.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I just realized I think I missed you out there in Midwest streaming. I don't think we chatted.
Yeah, I didn't make it, so that's
Oh, which is
yeah,
ironic since you're right out there.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right. So I'm going to give a quick recap from last week. As you were asking earlier, are the sessions recorded? Yes, they are. There's a QR code right there to last week's session. So last week what we did is dug into some breaches as a good way to kick off the Salesforce security office hours. So kind of went through the different recent breaches. I think there's been more than these, but these are just the big ones lately, which was the Coca-Cola breach, which was basically it was just some, I think through phishing attacks there were some credentials that were exposed, and they got in to install a bunch of their records. Qantas, I believe that one was from the fake data loader that they got installed, stolen all the records. Disney, they was not specifically Salesforce, but it was Slack, where a piece of malware was downloaded, getting them access to all their Slack account, which now Disney's canceling Slack, as we know, wasn't really Slack's fault since Disney didn't have other controls in Slack. And then the big Microsoft breach that just happened recently where Microsoft had in SharePoint for on-prem SharePoint servers. There was a major breach out there and that was identified at a conference, and it was patched but not patched correctly. And then I think a very large number of organizations were impacted. If you want to learn more about that, there's the QR code for that. All right, let's get on to the fun stuff. So this is a question that I have actually asked a lot of people as I've been, talking to people about Salesforce security. And someone actually raised this to me myself, and I never really thought about it until someone asked it. Is like, why do Salesforce projects rarely have dedicated security roles? And while their other enterprise projects do. So like I've worked in, I mean, mostly Salesforce in my career, but I have been on other enterprise type projects earlier in my career. And it seemed to always have somebody that was a security role hovering around that project, making sure that, they were developing things and architecting in a secure way. It's typically like a security architect or an analyst or something. But I can only remember a handful of Salesforce projects when this was the case, like specifically in government, I think. I don't know, John, have you, I mean, maybe, in your work more, but I think generally this is always the case. And this is why we're digging into this today.
Yeah, I agree. It's not something, when we're talking about what type of roles are on projects to help support a client or even from a client's perspective, well, like it doesn't often come up at all. Um, so it is a gap.
Yeah, and I think it should. So I wanted to give a real life story because I think it's good to make things personal. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about my book that I wrote, in which I'll actually, if you wanted some free content from the book, it's actually in the Low Code Security Alliance Hard Truths about shared responsibility in Salesforce. So you can look that up. But basically, I wrote this book because I was on a consulting project in my prior life where we were just sitting, and one day I got that message that no consultant wants to get, which was, "Hey, we've been hacked." And basically, what happening was an ethical hacker had reached out to the organization and said that they were able to get to over 5,000 records with private information in the case record through the guest user in their public-facing digital experience site. And that was because basically the customer had some misconceptions about and generally how digital experiences worked. And they thought that, because if you couldn't see it, that meant you couldn't get to it. And that's highly true if you're using Visualforce, right? Because in the old days, that's server-side rendered, and you can't really get to any of the data. But with Lightning, and that's true whether it's digital experience or internal Salesforce, you have all these APIs that power Lightning, as powers your layouts, the way that the fields on this page, and then the data that's displayed in those fields. All of that are client-side facing APIs. And so if some, when that page loads, all these APIs as well are calling data to show everything you see on the screen. So if you don't have your data secured, then somebody can actually call those APIs, even if they're not normally loaded. If you know the right APIs to call, and I've done this, and I have a video that showed doing this, you could actually retrieve the data. So, for example, in our case here, if there was case record data, which there was, that was publicly displayed, basically what happened was, and I'm not going to give it all away, but they had a magic link so people didn't finish the submission. You could go back and finish it later. But that meant that cases were now exposed publicly because that's the only way you could do it without logging in. Well, anyone that knew what they're doing could then go in and they could query and get all that case data back, even though it wasn't displayed on the UI. And so basically what we ended up doing was we ended up figuring this out. The whole site got shut down, and then we found out the problem, fixed the problem, and then I wrote this book to make so people knew, how that happened, that could happen, and so it doesn't happen to them. So this is one of those things where it's a real life story of making, if there was a security architect who knew deep about Salesforce security in all aspects of it, this probably would not have happened. And I mean, and even just calling myself out on this, I was an architect at then, but I wasn't deep into security at that point. I was still earlier in my career, and I thought I knew a lot about Salesforce, but that just shows that even architects aren't security experts about Salesforce because that's just not what you focus on. I mean, I love analogies, so I will give this analogy. When you build a bridge, if you're driving on a bridge, do you want the general contractor to oversee that bridge, to the or do you want the structural engineer to ensure that is specializes in building bridges and analyzing the bridges and making sure they're sound, to make sure that bridge is built right. So even though they both understand how to build things, you want the person that has, specializes in that one thing. So anyway, and John, feel free to jump in on anything here as I go through some of these things. There's going to be some more I think we can discuss a little bit later. So I had this last week, and I think this is great quote: 99% of data cloud breaches are preventable. Not 100%, because I think the sad truth is you will have a breach someday, but it's more about how you prevent that breach, how you contain that breach, and what you do, beforehand, to ensure that you can prevent as many as possible and that you can contain those breaches so they're small when they do happen. All right, so let's get into just to review some of the data risks. So why do we even care about this stuff? Why do we care that we want to protect, the data in Salesforce? What are things that that could happen in a project that could cause, some of these data breaches? Well, we see this a lot all the time, over permission profiles, permission sets. People put view all data, modify all data because it's easy. They just don't think about it. Like, oh, this is, I'm just going to check all these when I create the object, but they're not really analyzing it. As I just talked about, the guest or other portal user data exposure, insecure API access, especially with third parties. I can't tell you how many of our own customers have sysadmin on their API users, even though we tell them not to do that. I mean, you have like session settings. I mean, all the stories we talked about last week with Coke and Qantas, and they're all about insecure session settings, custom code bypassing security. Think of without sharing other things that you can do in the code itself that could cause data to leak out. Connected applications. I think that was the fake data loader recently. Insecure connected applications. Insecure malicious browser plugins. This is something I actually was talking to someone about yesterday, where people don't realize when you're installing these plugins into Chrome, a lot of times it doesn't even use a connected app. It has you could just piggyback across your existing Salesforce session to get your data in Salesforce. So if you have this malicious plugin, that could easily be just accessing your data in Salesforce and doing things that you don't intend without even thinking about it. I talked earlier this year at TDX about Agentforce, actually both TDXs, about creating secure agents, thinking about like what data is coming or leaving with Agentforce, or even agents themselves. Are they, do they know not to give that data out? And so that's something else to think about. And just the list goes on. There's so many things to think about in Salesforce when it comes to risk and data security. This is why you need somebody that is there to cover it. So another stat here that I love giving stats out. Since the start of 2004, there have been a 109% increase in Salesforce targeted phishing attacks. So that's an interesting metric. And every year it seems to be going up and up and up. And I think that's where I believe it was the Coke one was targeted by phishing attacks. And that's how they got into their org. And I said this last time as well, from phishing specifically, that's targeted, you typically getting your, access to your credentials as you type your credentials in. Well, if you have multi-factor authentication, session security, other kind of security, that reduces or eliminates even the risk in many cases someone could get in. So like I'm not that afraid of my user and password getting out because I have multiple other layers of security. So that's kind of one of your best defenses against phishing attacks, are having these different layers. All right, let's talk about here the skills gap problem, and maybe this is where we can have a little bit of discussion here, John. So I think that there's a fundamental issue that I see here is the gap between the project teams and the security teams. So, and we look here, the project teams themselves, they have deep knowledge of Salesforce. They understand how it's configured, but they have a limited or shallow understanding of security best practices, and specifically in Salesforce or even other frameworks. I think most security professionals, if you ask them, can you tell me everything you know about NIST, about ISO, NIST, SOX, high trust, even HIPAA or all those, they probably can't tell you very much about it. But then you go to a security person, and then they have this strong knowledge of the security principles, the frameworks, the compliance, but limited or no understanding of Salesforce. And Salesforce risk, data sharing, all the stuff that we talked about there. It's mostly these generic checklists that they go through. I've been through security reviews in Salesforce, and people ask, okay, well, are your Salesforce APIs have encryption in transit? Well, yes, because you can't call a Salesforce API without it being TLS. But then they don't ask, well, what do your sharing rules in Salesforce look like? What's your org-wide default model there? How are you doing without sharing? They don't ask any of that stuff. And I think that's the fundamental issue. I don't know, John, your
No, I think it is the fundamental one of the biggest issues. I think the way in which people understand the shared security model or shared security model between Salesforce, which just as a quick definition of that is Salesforce, the company provides security for a lot of the underlying architecture. And the shared aspect of it is that everything, all the data, everything that you configure within the org, that's on you, the owners of the org, the teams maintaining it. Um, and I think that sometimes it feels like the way in which Salesforce sits within an IT department at companies is that it does feel a little bit like more IT adjacent than actually fully in the IT realm. And I think part of that is the way that people misinterpret that shared security model. They think that, well, Salesforce is secure. It's not something that we need to really care about.
mm,
Um, and I don't think, that a lot of security teams at companies fully understand um, what is accessible within a Salesforce org and how it's set up. And I think there would be a lot of raised eyebrows with what they would see. And so I think there's just a fundamental disconnect between these two teams that really lets Salesforce project teams handle things on their own, which we're not all experts in this, and so there's going to be gaps that arise not on purpose, but just because of all of the different surface areas that exist that for configuration.
Exactly. And also I would even extend this sometimes to QA teams, because sometimes you get these QA people that they have because they want the QA people to not know about the solution, just to be very neutral. But then they bring sometimes these QA people in that have never used Salesforce. And one time, you might laugh about this, or a little bit earlier in my career, I had this QA person said, "Hey, we want to do a stress test against Salesforce, and see what do a test for an outage. Can you have them shut the server off for an hour so we can do an outage test?" And it took me 15 minutes to explain why they can't shut the Salesforce servers off. And I mean that, but I think that's just fundamentally like imagining, and now that's a security person thinking the same way when they're approaching security. I mean, it's like this black box to them. So,
The other gap, there's another gap that I think exists, and it's a little bit more focused on the Salesforce side of things, is that traditionally the way in which Salesforce security models have been set up uh, are time consuming. They're hard to uh, they're not very transparent. They're hard to keep track of. They're hard to change,
mm,
um, and they're not always defined. And so by just that fact alone, they're hard to change quickly and safely. And I think one of the dangers that happens is that The platform, on the other hand, in other areas is rapidly accelerating what can be done on it. Take
Hmm.
Agentforce and things like that. The more you start introducing things like Agentforce or other types of integrations, anything that adds another surface level or surface area of risk, it's harder to address quickly because the way in which changes and structure of the security model is just inherently slow to do.
Yep. Most definitely. And then just also keeping up with it. And Salesforce adds
Mhm.
new objects every day. And then if they add something new, and then maybe sometimes it's turned on, sometimes it's not, and you're not sure. It's just keeping track with that. And I mean, security, it starts at the DevOps level, of course. You have to have a really strong DevOps built in because, once it's in prod, it's in prod. And there's now, it's a little bit late at that point. So anyway, moving on here to the next part about this is breaking down. I want to go down, break down the actual project roles. So where the project roles start falling short in the Salesforce side, and then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the executive level as well. So let's just go through this. So you have, first your business analysts. Well, they're focused on delivering, their business outcomes quickly. They typically don't have that security mindset. They're more of the functionality mindset. They don't think about least privilege. They just think about, hey, I just need to get this new function in, need to help my users, right? So this security, I actually did this in London, this exercise, and it was like I was the security person, and then I go to talk to the business analyst, and they're like, "Oh, I don't have time for you right now." And that's that's a lot of time that the case of really what happens in the real world. Then you have the Salesforce admins, which I love. The admins are the connectors in the Salesforce org, the world. They're mastered as the declarative, but a lot of times I've seen this, and I've been one in my past life, and they frequently over provision users because it's too easy. Need to get this done now because the business is pushing on you. I'm just going to click modify all data here on this field or view all data. And they do like, a lot of times, just misconfiguring things inadvertently. It's not like it's intentional. It's just, really quick, or they just don't understand the ramifications. Sometimes there's too many permission sets that have been created and they're not named right. And so maybe they're adding the access and just unaware. And so that's why, sometimes just adding one checkbox can have big implications, especially that's why, again, back to that DevOps model, not doing it in prod uh, if you can. There's one metric I wanted to call out here for I don't know if you know how much I think, John, Elements probably and others, but they did a study and they basically wanted to see how many roles had modifiable data in or profiles permission users in an org. And so they stripped out any user that looked like they're an admin user. So any non-admin users that had modified data. And on average, there's about 20 non-admin users that had modified all data in an org, which is huge. So and all right, so then we can have another little chat after I get through these roles. So next is the developers and the architects. I think sometimes the developers, as we know, admins are always towards, hey, let's do it with no code. Developers, a lot of times, especially ones that haven't been around very long, they go immediately to code and they just start coding it without thinking. And I was one of them. I would just say, hey, I can just knock this out really quickly. It's really easy. Just write the code for it, get it done. And I even myself, when I think back on myself, I didn't really think about like, and making sure it's secure. I was saying, okay, well, without sharing is easier. I can get to the data I need. I didn't think about the implications. I didn't check to make sure that there was SOCL injection or anything else. I mean, I had to, I took my security awareness training, but I never received Salesforce security awareness training. I think that's it. Like, the architects then at the same time, and this is kind of when I was on this project and this happened, I was an architect. I considered myself an architect, and they understand they have deep expertise in Salesforce architecture, but not Salesforce security architecture is kind of where I would say like I mean even for our own product, I've gone in an entire room of people and asked, does Salesforce scan for viruses? And still 80% of the room thinks it does. And so that already proves my point there of the depth of people, of lack of their understanding of deep security things. I think they understand the top level, like profiles, permission sets, sharing rules, those kinds of things. But then how you tie it all together and what things you should be thinking about, I think that expertise is still lacking. And then back to kind of what I said before, most architects, I bet you if you started asking about NIST, ISO, SOC, all that, they probably couldn't tell you that much about it when first compared to like a security person. And then, okay, all right. And then really, I think we'll stop here. I don't know if John, if you had any other commentary on those roles before I jump into the executive side of things.
Um, no, I mean, I think like only other thought that, and we can maybe talk about this after, is that, there's all sorts of other reasons to take your security model seriously and understand what users, like who your users are, what they should and shouldn't see, um, besides the actual security of the data. Um, it helps make development quicker, delivery quicker. It helps testing be more efficient. You save a lot of time. Understanding why something may or may not be working as expected if you have clear definition of around, you know, what your security model looks like and how it's supporting the users that exist for the org.
Yeah, I think most definitely. And I think I'll go back to like your developers and architects because those are the ones generally building a lot of your application, right? And you do have your configuration developers as well, so we can bucket them all together. But I think the biggest two things that I notice that people forget when they're building a Salesforce project is reporting and security. Those are usually the two things that end up being thought about last. Even your business analysts say, okay, these are the things we want to happen. But they don't really think really deep about, those two things. And then once you get further down the path, you've already built your data model, you've already started putting your layouts out, and then all of a sudden you hit a roadblock. And maybe you're not getting the data out in the reports, but then also maybe you start thinking about security, and then you realize there's certain things that now I can't do based on how I've already designed the solution. And I think that's kind of going back to making sure that people are thinking about it first. And that goes back to well architected. And that's why the first pillar is, trusted, right? Because you should be thinking about that first and foremost. So, all right. Okay. So let's talk about the next level. So I think, it's not just on the project teams. There's a talk that I do about the disconnect between the project and the C level with when it comes to Salesforce projects. So there ends up being I think it's the leadership blind spot when it comes to Salesforce security. So Salesforce has really good messaging out there, and as we know, and when it comes to being a secure platform, being a trusted platform, well, sometimes that messaging goes, I think, too far into people's heads, and they start believing that they don't really need to think about it too much because it's a secure platform. I actually ran into this last week at Midwest Dreaming. I talked to a guy and was talked to him about the security of their org, and he's like, "Well, IT security takes care of that." And he was the product owner. I was like, but and the analysts take care of that, and I don't really need to worry about that. And I was like, well, do you have people developing in your org? He's like, yes. And it's like, well, they are the ones typically that can cause some of these issues. And it still kind of didn't get through his head. The exact also, when it comes to budget and resources, they only, allocate certain amount of budget, and there's typically there's not a good communication pathway when it comes to saying, okay, we need to change our budget because we found a security issue. They typically don't want to hear that. They just want to hear, well, this is the budget, this is the time, get it done. I don't care. And then I think the last is and most important here is the lack of that shared understanding of what is shared responsibility. That's why we created that white paper, or a little bit more than a white paper, on the Low Code Security Alliance. I mean, I think they there's just a little bit of a misconception on what shared responsibility really is. So,
And I'll just one other thought that I have is that I think Salesforce, like a lot of tech platforms, a lot of tech companies, um, they uh, they drive hype on things, and
mhm.
a lot of I think executives and at the C level um, might only be hearing about the hype stuff. So like
Yeah.
Agentforce, for example. Uh, and so I think one of the problems with security uh, definition and modeling and architecting within Salesforce is that people know that their security model might not be, you know, clear or well defined and well architected or well implemented. Um, but it's the least sexy topic
Mhm.
for people who end up signing off on work. And it's hard sell to get them to connect that to something like Agentforce, where, if you don't take security seriously, you are introducing potential big risks with moving forward quickly with Agentforce. And so I think one of the challenges that we all have is how to always be bringing in security to these conversations around any of the new um, hype, products or things that get introduced to the platform.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially after Dreamforce, everyone wants all the new shiny things that Salesforce just talked about, real or not, right? And I think part of that also is a lot of times they don't want to spend the money on the security because that's not something that they can see and feel, even until something bad happens, and then that's when they want it. Like, people don't buy insurance until their house catches on fire, and I can tell you my house is caught on fire, so I have really good insurance on my house and Salesforce is your house, right? You need to protect it. One other thing I also mentioned just on top of this as well of is thinking about like, they talk about, the shared responsibility and we talk about Salesforce trusted platform, and now we have Agentforce with the trust layer. And I think people are putting a lot of trust saying the trust layer takes care of everything, where that's not actually the case. Your data will leave the trust layer if you put private data into Agentforce. It's going to leave the trust layer out of Salesforce to get processed. And these are things that people should be thinking about as well. So, all right, another fun metric. 66% of CISOs say they're worried that cybersecurity threats in their organization are facing are more advanced than their defenses. And this is a recent study done by PwC. But the question is, are they doing anything about it? So now let's talk about where. Um, uh, so Michael, go ahead. Mark, sorry, I saw you just raise your hand.
Yeah. Could you go back 2 slides?
Sure.
So, every slide that you covered so far, I mean, I agree with 100%. I would give a quick background. I was a consultant slash architect for many years. Now I work for an actual customer. I don't want to name them for obvious
Yeah.
reasons. But I mean, it's like each slide that you went through is like, oh yeah, I agree, I agree. And this one right here is like, oh my gosh, I see this every day. I try to bring up the idea of security, and my manager, who is the Salesforce platform owner, says, yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Like all technical debt, like we'll get to it. And but we never do, you know. And the senior leadership, all they care about is what our sales numbers are, and is Salesforce doing what it can to help our sales guys sell more widgets. That's all they
Yeah.
care about. That
Yeah.
that's
And
all they care
something
about.
hits, right? Until something hits, and then they
Oh
care
yeah.
about. I
Yeah,
mean, I think,
exactly. And I just fear, I really fear that um my company is until we get a data breach, we're just going to be whistling by the graveyard. But they won't even know they're whistling as they're walking by the graveyard.
oh,
You know,
oh yeah,
um, we
exactly.
have we have a we have a what I call a sharing and visibility project starting soon. We have a couple contractors that are coming in that's going to do an assessment, but it's all going to be what I characterize as sharing and visibility, user access. After they've logged in, none of the technical aspects of security. Um, out, everything. What I kind of think of security as everything, between logging in and actually being able to see or do anything. all of all of the hacking stuff, and I'm not a technical person. I'm not a technical architect. I did pass this, the sharing and visibility architect certification, so I know about all that. But everything else that's part of security that's not part of sharing and visibility, I don't know what any of that means. I mean, I couldn't advise a client on it. I just know we have vulnerabilities. Now, we have an IT department that is supposedly securing Salesforce, but I don't know that for a fact. And it seems like all they care about is what our compliance department cares about, which is, you know, we're not allowed to touch we're not allowed to touch production. We have to go through this very arduous DevOps process with 4 sandboxes to deploy the simplest things. That's where their focus is on, is that kind of stuff for SOX compliance, but they're not spending any time thinking about security. And it's like, you know, what I fear is that the what is going to hit the fan, and they're going to blame my department, which is essentially Sales Cloud, um, Sales Cloud platform. They're going to blame us, you know. But anyway, I don't mean to hog up your time. I apologize, but I just want to know your discussion points are just really resonating with me. I hear it. It's just, how do we convince management to care about this? That's the problem that I
I
see
actually
out
do have
there.
some slides at the end about that as well. So,
Yeah.
but,
It,
yeah.
yeah, and it's like,
Yeah, it definitely, and that's why, that's exactly why I started these office hours, for to get not only for the implementers, but also for the executives to understand and see these things and hopefully raise awareness. I mean, I think one of the things that I'll go into, we can talk about at the very end as well, is the things that the executives should be looking at are these breaches. Look at what is actually happening to other companies, because if that happens to Coke, it happens to Qantas, it happens to Disney, it's going to happen. It can happen to you. And all these are all happening, in real time now. So I think, and I am for these arduous DevOps processes, but with purpose. I think there's a reason. Just having this DevOps process just to go through the motions isn't the reason, but having those checks and balances, those gates, and doing the right checks and the right balances to ensure that everything is safe. Not only that you don't break your existing functionality, but you're also looking at, okay, what are the security impacts as we move up that pipeline all the way to prod? I think that is definitely important. But I think a lot of time people aren't doing all the right things they should be doing, even for that. Like, I'll go into one other thing like with that. So you should be doing, for example, code scanning, but code scanning is just the start of it. And that is one of the things that those security people do ask about. Are you doing code scanning in your org? Great, check the box. And then do you have someone reviewing the code? Yep, check the box. But is the person reviewing the code a Salesforce specialized security person that understands the security implications of that code? Nope, but that no one's asking that question. So
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, yeah, I could talk one-on-one with you guys forever, and then you'll never get through your content. So,
hey, I'm happy to
thank
do it anytime. Feel free to
okay.
DM me anytime you want to talk. All right, so I'm going to continue on here. So now let's go dig a little bit deeper into where the executives are falling short and why. So as we see here, the little understanding of Salesforce specific risks. Back to, I think, that talking about the Salesforce messaging that's going through. They don't understand about the guest user data leaks. Maybe they should read the book. Over permissioning of profiles, session security issues. They do not realize that most breaches are caused by customer side misconfigurations, not Salesforce platform flaws. They don't recognize that, or maybe I don't know if I say this carefully, they don't recognize or just don't think about that generic IT security reviews do not protect Salesforce environments, because Salesforce is a special type of animal. And you just having these one-size-fits-all security reviews, does not cover much of how Salesforce works. And then the whole reason about this talk here is they don't mandate that security is first and foremost in Salesforce. They don't put and say every project must have a security role, and you should every project has to have security requirements, and not just top level ones, but deep security requirements that have been thought through and architected, just like you would architect the solution in as much detail as your business requirements you would. It's like because like you look at other projects, like I mean I've been on before for a little bit an SAP project. I used to be a .NET developer. All of that I had to have there were more seasoned security people that I worked with on those projects, and that's standard. So the question again is, why is that not standard in Salesforce? But I think this is a lot of this is kind of some of the things we've already touched on. So but I don't know, John, if you have anything on this one as well, or covered it all.
No, I just I agree.
All right. Okay, so now we'll continue on some more areas. So I think this is also some of the part of it, and part of that talk I was talking about that I did up in Dubai about that disconnect between the project team and the executive team is there's no easy way for risk escalation into the executive level. Project teams fear that retaliation for raising risk, especially securities that could delay timelines or budgets, saying, okay, it should be, hey, if you find a security, I understand if there's functionality misuse that you don't architect it right, but if you find a security issue, it's okay because this is our data, this is our customers' data, this has cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. Just let us know, and maybe we can find a way so the next time we can do it better and identify this sooner. But there should be an easier pathway. That doesn't exist today. I mean, I've seen the teams, they sweep it under the rug. They, find a workaround. They do take shortcuts to get it out as fast as possible because they don't want to bring it up to management that a security issue is found that's going to delay the project and cause more budget. I think the same thing is with our product as well, with our virus scanning product. People come in and say, "Hey, we don't have budget for this. Is there some way we can get this in, later or do something else like that?" Kind of recovered this one. And I think I covered it all. No formal process to escalate and all that. Then the misalignment with the security frameworks. I mean, I've been preaching that you have specific frameworks like ISO, you've got NIST, you've got what is it? You've got FedRAMP, you have all these things that are very, for infrastructure types of things. You have then the personnel things, but you don't have any framework really for security that maps to Salesforce going through. I think it'd be great if you could map like your ISO, like your SOX to Salesforce security functionalities. I think there's a way you could do it because it all is, similar, but Salesforce again being very specific, it's not a perfect mapping. And I think that just, if you could have a way, because if someone says, okay, let's do the ISO checkbox here, the SOC checkbox, well, you're going to miss a bunch of things. But I think it's going to need like an extended version of that for, looking at this Salesforce. So, and then last here is all of this leads to blind risk exposure. All right. And so kind of wrapping up this section of the talk. So what is the resulting gap? Well, project teams, they know Salesforce, but lack deep Salesforce expertise. Security teams know the frameworks, but lack Salesforce knowledge. Executive believes they're covered on both sides when they are not. So then all these Salesforce orgs go live with these critical risks unmitigated data that is easily can be exposed or can be taken advantage of by phishing attacks, relying that the hope that the security is under control when it is not. So, all right. Another, John, anything else or all good? All right.
No, good.
And anyone else, feel free to jump in. All right, another fun metric. As you guys seen, I love my metrics. Okay, 42% of executives identified cloud-related threats as the most concerning cyber threat they're least prepared to address. In the same report, I looked at PwC. And actually, what's interesting is, I think as CISOs felt like they were more prepared than C-levels executives were less concerned than the CISOs, of course, obviously. But But this kind of is telling right here that only less than half feel like they're prepared to handle cyber threats in cloud. All right, next is so how this leadership gap leads to breaches. So again, this is another way of saying kind of what I just said, but you have there's no executive mandate, no one pushing from the top level. I mean, I think from centers of excellence, for example, everything needs to come to the top or it's meaningless, right? A COE with no backing is not really a COE at all. It's just a recommendation. You should have executives mandating this is what you need to be doing for your Salesforce security. You need a security role. You need to make sure that you have your hard security requirements. Someone needs to review those, make sure that they're solid before we move forward with any building. There's no escalation path, as we talked about. Shortcuts start being taken, and then you start having insecure solutions deployed. There's no Salesforce aware security audits and review process from the security teams. So of course, again, meaning that these generic one size fits all audits miss things when it comes to Salesforce and data security. And then this all leads again to breaches, revenue loss, fines, reputational damage. If you're actually interested in seeing what the true cost of data breaches, I actually built a calculator that's available on our site at EzProtect.io. And it's based on 6 months of research I did across multiple industries and what the cost of a breach is. Now, I mean, think about this from a breach. And I think, Mark, you were saying, how do I talk to my executives to really understand this? Well, break it down to them because they're saying, okay, well, this is going to delay increased sales. Well, what if you get a breach and you lose all those sales? So first off, there's a metric out there that says when after a single breach, anywhere between 1 to 10% of customers will leave the company, stop doing business completely. So what if your company, I mean, it's a large enterprise, and let's just say Salesforce lost 1% of their customers. How much money would that cost them? Now, they want to gain those customers back. So what's your cost to acquire a customer? So now you need to gain those back. So that's a double hit. Then after that, your reputation is still damaged. So you still need to pay for the marketing for that reputation. Then you have fines like GDPR, which can be as much as 20% of your revenue. We've seen some really big fines, like $1 billion fine from GDPR against Google, I remember, and others out there. You have legal fees and then credit monitoring. I saw this one company, they had to do credit monitoring on 26 million people. And I mean, credit monitoring generally costs anywhere from about $100 to $200 a year per person. So do the math, 26 million times $100 a person. So these are the true costs. So I mean, there's a report out there from IBM that says on average, a single breach will cost you $9 million in the US. Well, that's just the initial impact. Think of like it's an earthquake, but then the aftershocks is where all the real damage happens. So you're not really talking about 9 million. You're talking about easily 100 million, 200 million, a billion. That's a lot of money when you really break down all these types of things here. So as I said, if you're interested, the calculator is on the site. All right. Okay, so what can leadership do now to close these gaps? So kind of the reverse of what we just talked about. First, they should mandate a Salesforce security architect on every single implementation and major project. It doesn't mean you have to be a one-to-one. You could have one person that kind of goes across multiple projects, kind of like your enterprise architect. I don't feel like the security role needs to be there all the time, but they need to be at the right times, the key times in the beginning, have oversight throughout it, and then at the end for sure. To define those clear, safe channels for escalating security risks, so people feel like like airing of grievances in a company. If you raise a security risk, there is no fear of any blowback. So other things maybe, but not security risk. Align with the, start building out a framework internally that helps to align those corporate security frameworks with the Salesforce itself, instead of just saying, okay, one size fits all. Well, Salesforce is different. So let's find a way to map some of these frameworks to Salesforce. And then provide executive level Salesforce security awareness training, educating them about things like Coca-Cola, like Qantas, like Disney. And I think there's a few others in there that were recent that happened as well, especially with that data loader hack that just happened. so they can see what happened to other companies like them, and so that it becomes real for them and they know the things they should be thinking about with this. I mean, treat it as a business risk, not a technical risk. I mean, it's not tech debt. It's, as we just talked about, you're putting your sales at risk, your customers at risk. You're going to lose customers. It's going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars in the long term after a breach. So, did you have a question or want to comment?
I was just gonna say, I think like a lot of those just follow from in my mind the third point here, which is where, establishing a line of communication with the corporate IT security, like bringing them into the loop, making sure that they understand what's different about Salesforce compared to the other platforms. Because I think a lot of that, like their own awareness might drive some of these action items. It's always helpful to have someone else along for the ride when you're trying to make a case for these.
Exactly. And then here's the one for Mark here. So, what can you do today without executive power? So, it's fine and dandy. Okay, telling the executives, okay, this is the things you should be doing for executives to get better. But a lot of times, as you say, they don't listen to you, right? You're lower on the totem pole and you don't have that executive influence. Well, there are things that you can do here to help raise that awareness in the executive teams that can help to make a change. And so, here, kind of as we're talking about, like documenting the security risks, I think on here, we do have kind of what you were saying, John, in a different slide maybe, but documenting the security risks, talking about like, raising two people, because a lot of times once they hear it, they can't unhear it, right? And making sure, and also that's that CYA too. Well, I told you that this risk existed, and now we have a breach. Here's where I told you this, 6 months ago. Using, I think using stronger language for the loss, like saying cut loss of revenue, loss of, regulatory fines, customer churn, getting new customers back, all that kind of stuff. I think that's much more powerful than saying, yeah, you could lose some money. No, no, no. 1% of your customer base will leave. What is that going to cost you? If 1% of your customers, how much does it cost to get those customers back? Leveraging examples, find examples and stories that are similar to what your company is doing, or the risks that you have identified, saying, okay, this happened to Coca-Cola, lost X millions of dollars because of this breach. And this is exactly the same things that I'm finding here in our organization. Start championing secure practices on your team, push for least privilege access and profiles permission sets, looking at, a little bit deeper into all the different permissions, looking at your guest user settings, looking at your session settings, pushing for that, it should be a best practice, but sometimes it's not. A lot of times it's, least privileged and secure by default. Everything is secure, restricted, and you start only open things up instead of leaving it open and closing it down. Advocating for regular, and not to say Salesforce health check, but health check reviews and overall like audits. Every time you do a release, you should be looking at the security. What's the impact of that security? Looking at your guest user access report that's in Salesforce. There's managed packages looking at that. Doing penetration tests on Salesforce, not your standard penetration tests, but penetration tests done by penetration testers that know how to penetration test Salesforce specifically. I'm going to kind of run through a few of these, and then we can have a little check. So we're almost out of time here. And this is what you were saying, John, building those bridges with the security teams, educating the security teams about Salesforce and about the security and sales, things they should be looking for example, so they start asking better questions. Maybe do lunch and learns, collaborating with security, help, doing like, joint workshops and stuff, escalating the right way. If you're like documenting, like I said, the facts. Don't just say, "Hey, we need to be better with security. Here's the things that I found. Here's how I found it. This is take the QA approach. Showing, okay, if I did this, then you can do this. This is how an attacker could our data. I was able to do that." Um, then try to just push some of those aspects up to the executive management. Mention them in a chat. Don't be afraid to send that data to them so they can see it. So, And then I think this is the last slide here is like, build a case, then start taking all that data, build a case to have a security role in the team because this happened. Like, for example, what happened in my book here is because this happened because we didn't have a security role. If we had a security role, none of this stuff would have happened. Also, by the way, it's going to save you money and time because your security team is not going to have to be constantly spending all that time doing the review and having all these findings because these will be taken care of beforehand. So therefore, it's actually going to save you money. Last thing I'll just say here is security should be built into your entire DevOps lifecycle instead of just being afterthought once you're ready to production. So, all right, that's pretty much it. We're at time, but I mean, I can stay on as long as you guys want. Do you have any other questions at this point on anything?
I can stay on for a little bit longer. I'd love to pick your brain a little longer if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. Do you have any specific questions right now you want to just run through for everyone that's on the call?
Could you go back a slide? Because it's gonna prompt my memory.
Which one?
That one, go back. Yeah, stop there. There we go. So I've asked about when we implement, should we try to implement least privilege access? That also goes by zero trust, right? Are those two terms synonymous? Least privilege versus zero trust. Are those synonymous terms or do they mean something different?
John, you want to take that?
What was the second term? Least, sorry.
Like zero trust or least privilege. Are they basically the same thing or there are some nuances there, do you think? Got my own opinion, but
I I I mean, I think the sentiments are the same. I, I think probably people can interpret them differently, but it's they're both going at the same principle, which is start from the least uh privileged, point of view and then go from there.
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
So I've advocated for that and it's been squished because it's just too much trouble. It's easier just to make it everything, public read only in my org, in our org, I should say. And, as far as I know, the only real exceptions are the opportunity object, that's a private object. And then there are some field level security in one particular object that deals with our profit margin on it. They keep that very secure.
yep.
But
Well,
yeah, and that's really about it. And I mentioned earlier that, we're having a sharing and visibility project that's starting. They got some budget to clean up profiles and permission sets. And I fear that's my manager who got this money to do it is he's looking at it very short-sightedly. He's not he Yeah, we definitely need to clean it up and organize it better and consolidate and follow a permission set model rather than a profile model. But is our system going to be any more secure when we're done, or is it just going to be easier to maintain?
I
Um,
mean, I think one of the ways to think about this also is going back, thinking about those breaches, right? I believe I may be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure Coke was the one that they got phished. So people got phished, they got the passwords, they got in, and even some cases they were able to get them voice phishing, like even give their two-factor authentication codes to get it. Well, if your users, you have everything public read only in your entire org, when that user this will happen when the users get phished and they get into that org, now they get access to your entire org instead of just a subset of data. And there's actually another metric out there that says your biggest risk to your organization are not external users, your internal users, because your internal users have more access than the external users. So if a user internally gets compromised, then everything they have access to, that attacker gets access to. So I would say show them that Coke, show them the Coke data breach. I mean, show them what happened there, and then explain to them that the reason not is not because you're afraid of that in your internal user. The reason is because when and it will happen someday, one of our internal users that gets hacked, they're now going to have access to all of our data in our entire org.
Right. That's a good
Matt, I have
point.
to drop, but thank you, everyone.
Yep. Yep. Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. So let me see here. Just a couple more things I just want to run through just really quick, of course, and then we can have time for some more questions really quick. So just for the video's purposes, so EzProtect, that's the company that I run, and all these sessions, of course, are being sponsored by EzProtect. Most people don't understand that Salesforce doesn't scan for viruses or files or links. That's another way that data can come into or get breached from Salesforce. That's actually what happened with the Disney breach recently. It wasn't Salesforce, but it was Slack. You have that virus that was downloaded from GitHub by somebody, and then that got into their machine that then allowed them to get all their passwords. And then that basically got into Slack, and they stole a terabyte worth of data from Slack. So that could be the same thing from Salesforce, for example. Someone could download a file from Salesforce, and then it's not really Salesforce that's going to get breached in that case. It could be, but it also could be other systems. What if you're a banker, your bank system, all that? Also, think of all the phishing attacks that are on the rise, those coming in, phishing links coming in through your digital experience sites, your email to case. And that's basically what we're trying to protect against for people. So um, let me see here. And the last thing here is I just have some resources that are available to everybody that wants them. So for the first is the book, again, Securing Social Digital Experiences. All proceeds go to nonprofits and good causes. So it's security for good. It's also a really good read, especially if you have people like Mark here talking about that don't really
Hey,
understand the
I
risks.
bought it about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, thank you so much. If you ever if I see you a show, I will give you an autograph in that book. So I'll keep track of where I am, and I'll sign it for you. And thank you for your donation. The second is just this might be helpful to you too, Mark. It's a bunch of blogs all on our website. So I'm a very firm believer of high value content. So we put together a lot of the stuff that we're talking here today and then last week and other things are all on the website and blogs and videos and stuff. So this is everything about not just what the virus scanning we do. We actually have a lot of the content is just about general security, trying to build awareness in the ecosystem. And then last but not least, I mean, for anybody, if you ever want a free risk-free Salesforce security assessment, happy to take a look at your org and see if you have any kind of risks, whether it's viruses or whether it's anything else. Happy to do that. Just that QR code there. So. And I believe that is our presentation, but I'm happy to stay on and answer any other questions you may have.
Yeah, is anybody else still on? Or is it just you and I? I mean, if other people have questions, I mean, I'll shut up.
No, I think it's just you right now, but like I'm happy to leave the recording on because your questions are valuable for anybody that
I
wants
have no problem.
video.
I have no problem. So I I I kind of think thinking about this, Salesforce doesn't spend enough time on this topic. I think they're leaving it up to partners or ISVs or partners that are in the security space like yourself that have a product or service um, speak about security, and then perhaps there's a revenue opportunity there. Great. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I think Salesforce should be spending time on this. And yet they're so focused on now it's Agentforce, obviously, right? Um, there should be a whole track of this topic at Dreamforce, at TDX, at the World Tours, and
Yep.
the problem is I know nobody's gonna want to do it because it's just a cost to them. they're not going to sell more licenses by having, 8 sessions at Dreamforce talk about security.
Yep.
I can't imagine them doing it, but I think they should do it
Yep, and I
because,
completely agree. I mean, I think I'll give you my thoughts on it, and I don't think it's rocket science. Is Salesforce is a business, and they're trying to make money like anyone else.
right.
And what does if they start spinning the narrative that you need to be worried about the security in Salesforce, then that starts putting doubt in people's head about the trust. Is it a trusted platform? And so, of course, marketing is not going to want to talk about the saying that, hey, Salesforce is a trusted platform. By the way, if you're not careful, you're going to get a data breach in Salesforce if you misconfigure Salesforce. It's not a really good narrative. Not saying that they shouldn't be doing that. It's just, I think, the nature of how it is. And so I think there's better ways that they could probably spin that narrative to make it, for people and educate people better, or maybe have other things that they could be doing to make it better. But you're right, it is a lot of the onus is on partners and on organizations like the Low Code Security Alliance to help educate people about the things that they should be thinking about, the risks that we should think about. Maybe once, if there's more data breaches, I mean, I don't want to see more, but maybe that will, open their eyes a little bit and help maybe get them out. Like my goal, I can tell you here, is to build a bigger following because of these office hours, and that's why I'm doing these. And then maybe eventually someday we could get a Salesforce security dreaming conference put together for people that do care about this. I mean, there's big enough conferences out there like RSA, so why not a Salesforce one? So
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, you're doing this once a week?
yep, right now we're doing, as long as we can get speakers and enough content, which I don't think there's a lack of, we're gonna be doing this every single week. So
That's great. That's great. Okay.
and
Sounds good.
please DM if you have any ideas for topics. You either DM me directly, comment on the event, and happy to put those into the queue.
Okay, sounds great. Hey, well, thanks a lot, Matt. I appreciate your time.
Mhm.
And we'll see you next week, hopefully.
Yep, and thank you. Appreciate it, Mark.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. Okay, bye-bye.